Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this dialogue with one of the new untouchables. If you tune in week in, week out, you know who Paul Pelletier is. But I'll introduce him nevertheless for those who hopefully new eyeballs to this very important dialogue. Paul Pelletier is a veteran of the Department of Justice. He's in private practice currently, as you can see, with the great sign in the background, the PEP advisors. He's also an adjunct professor at George Washington University. But the reason I know him is because he was in the Department of Justice at the highest levels, prosecutor trained, really pretty much generations, I guess, of within the Department of Justice, teams that would have to tackle high level, very sophisticated white collar crime. Paul Pelletier has been the subject of many incredibly important documentaries. He's been the focus of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, deep dive in all things FinCEN files, for those of you who might remember the Panama Papers and all things that are still to this day not fully understood by the American people, but that are backdrop to everything that's going on. Now, we're recording independently on Tuesday, May 19th, 2026, because Paul has once again leaned into the state of play and written an op-ed that we're going to share here that was just recently published by DC Reports. Now, Paul has been published in the past in many very notable publications, including The Atlantic, for a paper he did many years ago when we released The Con, which is, again, why I was able to meet Paul to begin with, my work, The Con, as a producer. And again, if you're just seeing for this first time, it'll make sense to you as we're rolling through this. But he wrote an op-ed 5 years ago, 6 years ago, after a collective op-ed by his fellow former regulators, prosecutors, people within the system, that we had to focus on a Manhattan-like project to deal with, at that time, corporate corruption malfeasance that seemingly had overrun our system. Now, here we are 6 years later, 5 years later, roughly, where we're right in the midst of news that we're all tracking on, and it's seemingly like the United States has suddenly discovered that our president is up to no good. We just saw yesterday, and we discussed this last Friday, Paul, that there's a slush fund, literally, given the figure $1.776 billion to help out those that were a part of the J6 insurrection, among others that we have seen Donald Trump pardon, which are global criminals, quite frankly. Now, suddenly people are like outraged by that, and they're asking appropriate questions. But like everything else, as our society seems to unravel further and further, there's not a plan requisite. What we've seen Project 2025 pull off after the 2024 elections in the depths of all things Doge and all of the misery and death and mayhem that it's created, on top of another war for oil, on top of market volatility, and many other things. It appears to me that the Democrats, per se, are running on a campaign of, we're not Donald Trump. We're going to try to hold him accountable in certain things. I just saw Jamie Raskin yesterday say, oh my God, there is no way we're going to allow this, clearly corrupt illegal behavior to manifest, i.e. the slush fund, on top of suing the IRS. And we could go on and on and on. But I wanted to tee you up, Paul, because from this perspective, there's no clarity on what Paul is doing, because he's been a prosecutor leveling the indictment and ultimately convictions of high-level fraud and criminality beyond your wildest dreams. And doing this from a standpoint of like, people, we have to reset. We have to recalibrate. We have to deal with really the level 5 hurricane disaster that we're in the midst of. So just briefly to get a kind of an opening comment, Paul, why did you decide to write this incredible piece that lays out the details of not only our history as a guideline, as a guidepost, but to define what we're in the midst of and then provide solutions? What motivated you?
Well, thanks for having me on, Patrick. Mostly for a lot of the reasons you've described. First of all, as the article points out, I was in the middle of trying to prosecute cases after the great financial crisis, right? And we all knew and realized at the time that Obama and the Obama Department of Justice was not dealing effectively with the great financial crisis. They were happy to reboot and to restore the financial wherewithal of Wall Street, but they did nothing, zero, to fix the underlying problems with unrestrained capitalism that had created a huge divide and left tens of millions of Americans in an economic wasteland. Tens of millions of people lost jobs. So I was, as you know, and as we discussed on the con, I've been very frustrated at the fact that Democrats didn't deal with it. And we are now, and I always believed that we got Trump because of it, because we did nothing to help middle America and working class America restore their the financial platform that they needed to succeed in America, to actually live the American dream, right? So for the longest time, I thought, well, Trump will screw up and then we'll be like you said earlier, we'll be back on track. The Democrats will take over and we'll be back on track. And it has become increasingly clear to me that we are at the cusp of the end of our democracy, literally at the end of our democracy. And so I've tried to use my economics degree and my law degree to try and figure out sort of where we went wrong and why no one is telling the story of how to fix it. The very simple story, very difficult process, but very simple story on how to fix it. And it's been extremely frustrating. Like you said, we saw Jamie Raskin say we need to hold people accountable. Sure we do. Sure we do. But just because we've been ping-ponging between Trump and Democrats, no one is getting to what I believe is the root of the problem, and that is the dissonance between corporate America and working class America, and how no one's talking about how to bridge the gap, how to fix where we are, which is the result of unbridled capitalism. So I try and walk people through that story by explaining history, talking about throughout our history of democracy, particularly the past 100 years, whenever capitalism sort of took over and was unregulated to the point of screwing people constantly, working class people, and creating an economic divide, the government had to step in to cure those deficiencies, to restore working class people to some sort of equilibrium. So I saw it as a prosecutor. I've been writing about it for a long time, the two systems of justice that we have for rich people and poor people. But at the end of the day, the real problem with America today is the Democrats' acceptance of the neoliberal order, which allows unrestrained capitalism. And that's where we are today. And what I try to deal with in this article is a recipe to fix the problem. And right now, because of the corruption in the Republican Party, the only ones left to do it are Democrats. Whether they can do it or whether they're going to chase Trump's shiny objects throughout the rest of the next 4 years, I don't know. But on a macro level, they've got to fix the economic disparity between the wealthy and the poor people, or we are in for two things. One, the destruction of democracy, and some sort of revolution, I believe.
And I think that's predictable based if history is, any sort of guide, which of course it is. But I think the profound sort of weight that weighs on my ears when I hear you make that introduction, the thing that I see all over social media specifically, because I'm using social media in my best sort of capacity, which is
Mm.
limited, to try to get the word out of the information that we have, that we share every week with your colleagues. That's extraordinarily important because you guys are the professionals within the system that have been working for decades in the trenches against these forces, right? Now we're in 2026 after the system itself has, in some ways, manner, shape, or form, sidelined the people who know. They've replaced the Department of Justice with lackeys. They've turned your institution, your hallowed institution, where you spent decades, which is a part of your soul. It's one of the most important and powerful institutions in the world, legal institutions, bar none. And what we're looking at is insane. But yet, what you see transcend, and this is what you just basically stuck a flag in, was, is, I should say, and it's predictable. We have a billionaire class that funds both parties. We have deep pocketed interests that would like to maintain a cultural war where everybody's pointing the fingers at everybody else, create a sort of socialism, or sorry, tribalism, if you will. It's pretty predictable to anybody that's been around for a long time. It's incredibly effective. But what we're seeing from people in their reaction to this, it's almost so out of the norm of ordinary with Donald Trump, even though those of us who know who Donald Trump who he is pretty much what he's been doing for 4 decades. But now within the Oval Office, with the entire apparatus of the most powerful government on the planet at his disposal because of all of these things that have happened based on what you're talking about. Specifically, both parties' intrinsic belief and commitment to neoliberalism. Said another way, a corporatocracy, a sort of corporate hegemony that we conflate with our superpower status, if you will, that these super Herculean giant organizations that we also see have created the disparity of wealth. We see CEOs making hundreds and hundreds of times more than the average worker, sort of thing. And there's no
275 times.
and what a lot of people are doing, and it drives me batty, Paul, is they're saying, oh, look, here's Obama. Obama wasn't that. Obama is all things the opposite of Trump. And you and I both know that if it wasn't for the Obama administration, and I know more than I ever would have without you, this is how I know, and your colleagues, but you specifically, that the Obama administration made monumental choices that set us on this path. Can you please maybe fill in from your perspective for people to understand what that means?
Sure. I don't think that they made choices to set us on this path. I think we were on this path, and they made choices not to deviate from the path. We had been on this path since, I would say, Ronald Reagan, the sort of the neoliberal order. So what I'd like to say is that, first of all, I think if they had a choice, there was a fork in the road. And Obama had a choice of, how do I fix an economy that is clearly stilted towards Wall Street and corporations? And again, we have to, I understood and I believed we had to rescue it. I believed we couldn't let our economy collapse. But there was zero thought in restoring the economic justice to the American people who had been ravaged. So again, that's part of the formula that's missing today. The reason why I got onto this is because nobody is telling, in my view, the story of restoration of our democracy. They're telling the story of, look, we need to put we need to reestablish the guardrails over here. And we do it in our podcast too, right? We talk about how we fix this thing, how we fix this thing and I'm not saying it doesn't need to be fixed, but all the fixing we're going to do in that micro level is going to be a waste of freaking time if we don't fix the macro and get people equal economic justice and restore a middle class and start putting a damper on the just the unregulated bullshit of corporate hegemony, right? It's not working. It's clearly not working. The wealth divide is ever. And if you read my piece, I walk you through what a horrible situation we have. And so Trump's not talking about fixing it. Democrats kind of are. One of the things that sort of motivated me to write this piece to try and sort of explain that there is a problem. Here's how the problem occurred. Here's how we need to solve it. Well, here's how it's been solved in the past. Here's how and why we need to solve it today if we want a democracy. One of the things that motivated me is I've listened to Graham Plattner a lot, right? And Graham tells little parts of this story, doesn't really put it all together like I tried to do. And maybe someone has a better idea than mine, but that's fine. But I don't hear politicians talking like this. I hear him talking about, let's get back to where we were. And as I try and explain in my piece, all that's going to do is give us 4 years. It's going to give us 4 years. We should have 8 years this time, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why we don't. But we need 8 years of a Hail Mary project to fix this, to show the American people that one party cares about them and can actually put fixes into our system that will actually restore economic justice throughout the working and middle class. So I just had the belief that nobody is telling this very simple story. And we keep hitting little pieces of the micro level all the time. Well, this is how we're going to fix this. And this is how we're going to. But if you just put your finger in the dike, the whole dam is going to come down, and it's about to. It's already. Trump too is indicative of the fact that democracy is on the verge of destruction, in my view.
And we're not going to get it back our lifetimes, which is I mean, talking about a Hail Mary project. I mean, my imagination could never in a million years think prior to what I learned on the journey of the con that this was ever be a possibility. Ever since my journey on the con, it led me to understand it seems like an inevitability because of what you identified. Let's look at the title, Mark. Sorry, Paul.
Yep.
It's the wealth gap, stupid. An urgent appeal for a Project Hail Mary to fix our broken economy. And it's very, shall we say, emotionally resonant when you look at, a homeless man on the street, particularly in this case, an African-American homeless man, given everything that we just saw with the Supreme Court and the Voter Rights Act, or the repeal back to Make America Great, Jim Crow 2.0 sort of thing. But all of that being equal, you identify some incredibly powerful moments here. And I wanted to just read this out loud first and try to trigger kind of walking through somewhat of the different steps that you lay out here. But in the first section, you state, while the paradox of economically strained Americans selecting a detached octogenarian with a disastrous economic track record cannot easily be reconciled, the roots of this dysfunction surely can be traced directly to Congress' failure to address and repair the embedded impediments to advancement of the economic ladder initially revealed through the failed policies subsequent to the 2007 great financial crisis, and then cemented into our economy during the upheaval of the global pandemic. Otherwise, complacent Democrats speak about the issue superficially as one of affordability, but it's never actually been just that. Instead, we are in the throes of an existential and potentially doomsday crisis rooted in stubbornly broken economy that has long been hardwired to benefit primarily society's upper crust. A powerful sentiment to start off with. Can you dig a little bit further into that?
Yeah. So again, I want to implore anybody who reads this article to send it to their congressman, send it to their senator, um, have them care about it, read it, send them to their Democratic candidates, have them care about it and read it. What I'm talking about there is, and I try to explain it later on, I try and walk through it, how in fact it is that the economy or the neoliberal order of unrestrained capitalism sort of played out in the great financial crisis, right? We had all of these stupid lending practices by banks, by Wall Street, financial firms, and all of these created securitizations of the worst loans, but it took over the country because it actually went into everyone's home, right? It affected every single American. Because when you're securitizing stuff, right, whether it be garbage stuff or good stuff, when you're securitizing them, that what you are is you're disconnecting the economic potential harm from the actual event itself. So you've now, through securitization, you've made it somebody else's problem because you just want to make money on this deal. You haven't hired a single person. You haven't created one single fucking job. But what you've done is you've turned an economic concept into a payday for you. But if it all collapses, you're going to go home. Maybe you'll be bankrupt. Maybe you won't. But the harm you cause is going to ripple through America because everybody has a fucking mortgage. Everybody has a house. And it is the house, which is people's houses, which is the principal accretion of wealth people have. All of their wealth is tied up in their houses. But what the failure of the great financial crisis was that not only did it take away the value of their people's homes, it took away their jobs. It took away the value of their bank accounts. It took away the value of their 401ks. So unrestrained capitalism just collapsed on itself and ruined the ability of middle America to basically thrive in a country, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They couldn't pursue their freaking happiness anymore. And most of middle America today cannot, right? So what do we do to fix that? First of all, in the great financial crisis, nothing, zero. We did nothing. How are we going to restore order? And then as we move forward now, we had, as I explained in my article, we had the pandemic, which further exposed the American working force because tons of people lost their jobs. And what did the government do? They gave out PPP loans to people, free money. But it didn't fix anything. It didn't fix any of the root causes of this. It didn't do anything to increase wages. It didn't do anything to restore people's health care. It didn't do anything to help mortgage rates. It didn't, or affordability of people's homes. It didn't increase the labor force in any way. So nothing that the government did went to those 5 root problems that are going to need to be tackled to restore economic justice for all these people whose lives have been literally put on the cusp of bankruptcy, and people are not talking about that.
It's a desperation economy for anybody who wasn't on the beneficiaries of incredible government largesse that followed the 2008 great financial crisis to basically stabilize the system, but for whom is the question this many years later. And we're talking, we're nearly 2 decades, and nobody still has fully provided the composite outside of us of what's actually going on to understand the perspective, because that's not the role of media, as we discovered. That's why we had to make the con. But then we've gone through our whole litany of challenges. But you define this as the fix imperative. And it says the unseemly chasm between the obscene wealth and long-suffering cash-strapped middle class and poor Americans remains a symbolic feature of the broad popular distrust and rejection of our historical democratic institutions. Consequently, our feckless government has proven clownishly incapable of addressing the root causes of this grotesque financial inequality. Intuitively, we know that this calcified wealth divide serves as the principal propellant of the current democracy destroying tumult. I don't know if I've read more powerful language, Paul. That is absolutely amazing. Please, pick up on that and give us some perspective of what our great nation had to do when faced with similar scenarios in the past.
Well, first of all, in the past, as it relates to that, what I'm trying to say there is, look at um, the, the 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 notion that you don't get to the root of the problem, the economic injustice that has not been solved, the 2/3 of America who are having a difficult time living anything other than paycheck to paycheck. 2/3 of America living paycheck to paycheck. One automobile bill away from bankruptcy, one healthcare bill away from bankruptcy. Think of the stress that that puts on people. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean, most of us have been at a time in our life where we live paycheck to paycheck. And I think that when you're young, it doesn't create that much stress, but when you have a family, when you have kids that you need to support and feed, it creates a tremendous amount of stress on people. And what does that create? It creates an illness. What does illness create? Fucking healthcare bills, right? That you can't pay because we have a fucked up healthcare system in the United States. And it continues to be even more fucked up. So what I'm trying to say is that what that forces is the election of populist candidates. People who say, "Oh, we'll put a chicken in every pot," and of course that never freaking happens. Trump has done nothing to help the people who vote for him, the lower, the middle class people that vote for him, or the working poor that vote for him. He's done nothing to help them, and the Democrats, quite frankly, haven't either. They do it at the margins, but they don't do it to fix the root of the problem. And so what we've been missing that has happened historically is that the people rising up against it, right? People rising up against it. Remember when the robber barons were at the turn of the century, were taking all the money and treating employees like shit. It was labor unions. It was public unrest that spurred Teddy Roosevelt to say no more. We're done. The same thing with the Great Depression, right? People had suffered from the excess of Wall Street that was unrestrained. People rose up. People rose up through poverty and for whatever reason, and Roosevelt, another Roosevelt, FDR, helped with change. And remember, each of the changes that they made, which were structural changes to restore democracy and also to put a clamp on unrestrained capitalism, all of those allowed the party in power to survive for the next couple of decades in each instance. Why? Because people were happy. Why were they happy? Because they had economic equality, they believed. And of course, it wasn't perfect. And of course, after FDR's New Deal, excuse me, after FDR's saving of basically America, what they didn't tackle was the injustice of healthcare, of the lack of healthcare. Ultimately, they did. They didn't tackle the injustice of race relations, where blacks couldn't get ahead economically. So that manifested itself in the 60s, right? In the 50s and 60s. And what happened? The black America rose up, a black revolution, right? To change. What else happened? We wanted to make sure we provided Medicare for our elderly because now their health was a problem. What else? We tried to restore voting again for all people in an equal way. The Voting Rights Act. So all of government took over to use the powers of government to restore the economic equality of American people. And again, for 2 decades, the party in power was the party that restored economic equality for people. That began to turn at the beginning of the 80s after the Vietnam War, and Reagan wanted to get into this new neoliberal thing where unrestrained capitalism is a good thing. And remember, and I talk about this in my paper too, tax equality. Up until 1963, the highest tax bracket was 93%, up until 1963 and 64. And there was tax equality for people and corporations, right? And we were doing fine. Were there any corporations complaining or wealthy people complaining in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when everybody was making money because they paid their fair share? No, they weren't complaining. And now look what it is. We have people like Trump not paying a dime in taxes. So anyway, my point is, it's very clear that we have to fix this in order to balance it and in order to actually restore economic equality to middle America. And that no one's talking about that.
Well, you point out in this section, upon his election, FDR instituted several New Deal reforms to combat the Great Depression by addressing three core principles. One, recovery of the economy. Two, relief to millions of impoverished Americans. And three, reforms to address the root causes of the Depression, which was exactly what you're talking about. There was always a response, like you said, with Teddy Roosevelt, because of the progressive movements that got to the square deal. Then there was more after the Great Depression that, of course, led what we understand to be the investigation by Ferdinand Pecora that would ultimately lead to enormous structural changes by way of the Glass-Steagall Act and then the Securities and Exchange Commission to be able to put Wall Street under the rule of law to hold it accountable, in which we became the largest superpower in the history of the world with the most important middle class. But in between those time periods, you do talk about, which I think is absolutely imperative given everything that we're seeing the Trump administration do with this Supreme Court that is moving everything, all of the progressive victories of the last 75 years to take us to a time that I used to learn about in middle school, right? And we were talking about everything from civil rights, Bloody Sunday, and LBJ's Great Society, which you lay out brilliantly. But I think it's the inspiration of leadership that we have to really rise upon or tap into because of what you're calling for. Let's look at this. In a nationally televised address in June 1963, President Kennedy called this a moral crisis and formally proposed civil rights legislation. Martin Luther King had described the compelling need for immediate governmental action as the fierce urgency of now. As JFK proposed, as his proposed legislation stalled, marginalized minorities became restless as unrest bubbled across the South. JFK's assassination ultimately provoked passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but the brutal March of 1965 Bloody Sunday police attack on 600 civil rights demonstrators at the Edmund Pettus Bridge demonstrated that more was needed. Martin Luther King described the immediate need for governmental action as the fierce urgency of now. Within a week, LBJ, fresh off of his landslide victory, gave his "We Shall Overcome" address to a joint session of Congress. By June, the Voting Rights Act was passed. Now, you remind us that it was a great national upheaval led by a moral crusade, if you will, to live up to what they used to say, even during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, the better angels of our nature, which always seemed to be the composite American character. We look out for each other. We care for each other. We have empathy for each other. We want each other to succeed. We don't want to create a system that uses unchecked deregulation, i.e., that there's a subset of the population, what we're referring to as the corporatocracy, that has unimaginable power because the law isn't relevant to them, which we're seeing play out in every aspect. That's what everybody's asking. They're trying to find a way now, Paul. And I've been trying to give it to them the whole time with everything that we're doing. But now there is a moment, right, that seems to parallel everything that preceded what would lead to those enormous populist movements that would then lead to the democracy of, by, and for the people responding to the people. Now America's looking for how do we take action to be able to bring the law down on what is obviously a criminal administration. And that is a conundrum, right?
Well, it is, Patrick, but I think the way I look at it is as follows. One, in the past, you had the oppressed fighting against the oppressors, right? What the beauty of MAGA is the oppressed are fighting against the Democrats. They're fighting against each other. So they've pitted the oppressed against Democrats. They've created Democrats as sort of the boogeyman. So what they've done is hidden the fact that the real boogeyman is corporate and corporate and financial America, right? The billionaire class. So rather than the oppressed opening their eyes and saying, my enemy is there, they're pointing over and saying, my enemy is over there, the Democrats. No, that's the beauty of what MAGA has done, right? So they've divided the oppressed, and the oppressed are fighting each other as opposed to fighting the bad guy, the enemy. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think what we see now is that we're reaching critical mass. I think, I would say that Trump has, if you will, a 30% approval rating, which is about the floor, right? And so that means 70% of Americans pretty much are not happy with the government. But Democrats will say, so vote Democrat, we'll win. What are you going to do? You've got critical mass in your favor now. What are you going to do to fix why you have critical mass? And what the Democrats have failed to do is say what they're going to do. So what I would say to you is on a micro level, yes, over the next 2 years, should they take control of the House, should they take control, hopefully, of the Senate, they can button down some affordability issues. They can button down some bigger issues. But unless and until they realize that affordability is just not getting the price of gas down, affordability is just not getting inflation down, affordability is just not getting the price of groceries down. Affordability is fixing the structural problems that prevent you from achieving some sort of economic parity with your peers, becoming employed, getting a good job, being able to afford health care. That's what affordability is. It's not eggs. It's not gasoline. It is giving you the power to have economic justice, right? So that healthcare is provided, so that people are paying their fair share of taxes. So I think that we keep losing sight. We keep talking about the micro, what we need to fix today, right, to keep the ship floating. But at the end of the day, we can't keep just putting our finger in the dike. If, in fact, we take over the presidency in both houses in 2028, that's when dramatic action, like I've put forth in my paper, have to take place. Have to.
Well, that's what both preceded, obviously, the Square deal with Teddy Roosevelt and the New Deal with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was there was mass movement towards that end that was then, configured in these paradigmatic ways, again, to have a country of by the for the people in a democratic process. serve the people in the way that our character has always imbued. And you define it here. I found it incredibly important to bring attention to. A democratic rescue must be revolutionary. With their deeply entrenched financial woes having been jettisoned by both their elected representatives and executive branch, the Humpty Dumpty of working class America has abandoned any hope that their broken finances are ever going to be put back together again. Americans along the Rust Belt, especially, now recognize that those lost union jobs are gone forever. The inescapable political discontent from that rupture remains ever present and is rife among the working class, which of course constitutes a big percentage of MAGA. And you say further, the existential challenge to the Democratic Party today is whether it can muster, for once, the courage, the imagination to radically alter this chronic social stratification by breaking corporate and regulatory capture to fashion a new economic model that ensures equitable opportunity for everyone. Otherwise, the risk map of Trumpism's billionaire fealty and diversionary chaos will continue to further dismantle our democracy while visiting economic havoc on the working and middle class. Success in the next two election cycles would offer Democrats a unique but narrow window of opportunity to codify and implement such a structural course correction. And of course, the Great Alignment, a roadmap to revolution. We're about to celebrate our 250th anniversary of the American Revolution with Donald Trump as our king. This is insane. I said it last time, it's unacceptable, but the American people have got to have guide markers from professionals that know the system, and the parties have got the intricate and immersed power to be able to do this if they're willing to tell truths about the system, as opposed to playing we're not Trump. Like you said, that's not a plan. And what you introduced down here, Paul, which everybody needs to understand, is that you lay out providing equal access to healthcare is number one. Can you explain?
Yeah. So, but by the way, number one, sort of the overarching thing that I've talked about to be fixed first before that is because you're never going to get to any of this stuff, because the only thing that can interrupt these five sort of guideposts to resurrecting the middle class and providing equal justice, the only thing that's going to prevent that is the constitution of the corrupt Supreme Court we have now, right? And so we have to deal with Citizens United, which the Supreme Court gave the power of our democracy over to corporations, right? Over to corporations that can afford to fuck around and screw up our elections. So, they have the power to shut down all of the progressive policies that I talk about here that need to be established in order to again provide economic justice and curb unrestrained corporate power. Right now, the Supreme Court's preventing that. So the first thing I say Congress has to deal with, and this is going to be only if there's a Democratic president and two Democratic houses, is to fix the fucking Supreme Court so that we have not ideological justices, but justices that, whether they be conservative, or Democrat, serve the interests of the people. So the first thing they have to deal with is Citizens United, primarily. Then once they deal with that, or as they deal with Citizens United, and by the way, states may have to take on this obligation too. Hawaii just passed legislation saying corporations are not people, and they don't have the same rights as people.
That's right.
And every goddamn state's got to do that. Number one, and that would partly fix that, but through legislation you can do it. Number one. Number two, healthcare. Healthcare is the biggest expense of most people in America, and it's the biggest cause of stress of most people in America. Now, Obama tried to fix it with Obamacare, and it was tough, and it got done, and it did provide health insurance to a lot of people in America. But we saw what happened after Obamacare was passed, and that is the Republican Party and the Supreme Court kept whittling away at the pieces of Obamacare that kept its costs down. And so, what we now know is that if you're going to provide healthcare through insurance, private insurance, it's not going to work. So we have to figure out a way, which may be, I've always been against single payer, but it may be a single payer model. And it has to be bold and it has to be different because insurance companies we've seen, and by the way, Trump gets this only, but he's full of shit. Only make insurance companies richer, right? So we have to find a way to provide healthcare to everyone that including even the wealthy, that doesn't have to rely on private insurance. That's all I'm going to say. So healthcare we have to do something about the healthcare problem in America.
I want to point out to the audience real quick, that when I first met Paul, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. The Great Recession, and I was piecing all of these, forensic sort of storylines and how the whole thing came to be in terms of the largest criminal racketeering enterprise in history that I would later find out. However, when I asked Paul what was going on at the Department of Justice when all of this liar loan scenario with a bunch of whistleblowers was taking shape, to put this type of stuff into perspective with corporate malfeasance, he was deeply involved with Medicare fraud. And it was enormous, and it required incredible resources of the Department of Justice. So I find that really amazing that you've got that, and I really appreciate it because obviously nobody realizes how important healthcare is until you need it first and foremost. But then again, if you've got a family and it ended up breaking you, given all of the other economic situations, it's no way to run a society. So let's move forward to ensuring tax fairness.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, and I quote in my article, the Oracle of Omaha, saying that I don't pay any taxes. My secretary pays more taxes, and everybody in America has to understand how fucked up that is. He also said I paid. I think he said I paid $5 billion in taxes. His companies paid $5 billion in taxes last year. And he said if the top, I want to say 100, but he might have said 500, but if the top 100 businesses paid that, there would be no taxes on the American people and we would have a balanced budget. Okay? So I want people to know and understand that we need to tax corporations and we need to tax individuals and we need to tax them in a real way. I've always been amazed as a prosecutor and having worked for the tax division, how it is that Republicans continuously fight for when Democrats want to have more tax enforcement, more tax collection under the current laws. In other words, if you remember, Biden passed legislation that hired 750 special agents. I think that's the number, 750 IRS special agents. The Republicans freaked out. Now, special agents don't make tax policy. They enforce tax laws. They go after wealthy people who are avoiding taxes through criminal violations. And Republicans go crazy about that. And I never understood that, except it's because they don't want to fucking pay taxes. But guess what? Everybody has to pay taxes. They should pay their fair share. So there has to be a radical change of the tax laws, a radical change of the tax laws in the United States that are going to be what Republicans would say disruptive. There has to be disruptive change to the tax laws so that we can, number one, pay for shit and stop corporate welfare and stop billionaire welfare and make billionaires pay their fair share. We talked earlier, up until 1963, rich people's top tax bracket was over 90%. And we did fine. We flourished as a country. I'm not saying that should be that today, but I'm saying it has to be a hell of a lot higher than it is. And we need to change the tax laws so they don't have so many loopholes and they have to pay taxes on their true wealth. And so there has to be disruptive changes in tax law. I feel that strongly. And so does the Oracle of Omaha.
And that's obviously hugely popular right now, especially taxing the billionaires. I mean, we've heard Bernie Sanders and Zohran Mamdani and the second places in Manhattan and so forth, which we've discussed on the New Untouchables, the market deserts that these unoccupied high rises in Manhattan for billionaires create because nobody's eating at the cafe or shopping at the grocery store or whatever. They just sit there as money laundering enterprises. It's insane, but I mean, it's extremely important. Now, you say here on 3, making housing affordable. That was always a big issue. I think every election I've ever seen, and obviously Trump made a whole lot of promises that he's certainly not delivering on.
Yeah, and it's a difficult problem because remember, uh, um, Bush wanted to give everybody a home, right? He wanted everybody to get a mortgage, to get a home,
Right.
and we saw what that led to, right? So
Yeah.
but there is a happy medium here, and there are ways. And look at what I tried not to do in this paper is actually, I tried to say what the problem was and what needed to be fixed, but I didn't define how to fix it because that's sort of would have this article would have been 500 pages, right?
Right. Policy.
So there are a whole host of ways. I just tried to isolate what the problems were, and there's a whole host of ways of obviously bringing mortgage rates down, bringing rental prices down, and in every state or city and big city in the country has different problems that require different solutions to make housing affordable. So all I said was, and what I try to say is, unless you unless Americans can find stable, safe housing, again, there will be no economic equilibrium for everybody. And so it's a huge problem that needs to and can be tackled, some on the state level, but on the federal level as well, in terms of bringing down rates, in terms of construction costs, in terms of not putting tariff on wood from Canada that we can't get in the United States, which drives up the cost of housing, on creating immigration laws that allow people to come in and build houses at the cheapest rates possible, not at the most expensive rates possible. So there's all kinds of ways to skin this cat, and I don't have all the policy answers, but obviously housing is one of the 5 things we need to tackle in order to create economic equilibrium in this country, and progressive policies can solve that.
And in addition, of course, bolstering labor and fair wages, which I think, given what we just said, what you just said, it kind of follows the same pathway. But what you're talking about is reinvigorating the middle class, which is, of course, got to be completely central to anything that is a revolution against the billionaire, tyranny. I mean, that's all there is to it.
That's why I focus on labor and wages, right? Because again, labor has been emasculated in this country, and so we've always been the best of ourselves when labor is on semi-equal footing with management, and we've always been the best of ourselves when that happens, and that gap has widened in a way that is profoundly hurtful to middle America. Number one, wages. The federal minimum wage is $7 freaking. That's a sin. It is an absolute sin. And again, in most states now, and particularly most blue states, minimum wage is $15. And guess what? The economy is doing just fine in those states. So at the end of the day, we have to have a living wage in this country. And to the extent that you're depressing the minimum wage, and all these capitalist people say, "Oh no, let the market drive the wage," but not federal legislation. That's profoundly untrue. And so you have to force businesses, even small businesses, to pay a fair wage to people so they can live. And that's a basic human right in my view.
Well, amen. And also, okay, so to close it, look, those are four parameters of just the guts of how the economy works, as well as if we want a functioning democracy to where we can have people that are producing that are every bit as important to the economy. And this is the way I always grew up, right? Was how can you have a consumer class without consumers? Now we
Yeah.
can talk about AI, we can talk about globalization, we can talk about neoliberalism, we can talk, but it's like you're just there's an equilibrium if you want a society that has to be protected by the law. And that's what you did your entire career. And I know your background and you have a big family and you guys had to work with each other and all the sacrifices that comes with being in a big, family and everybody's got to pull their own weight. And that's kind of the vantage that I feel that you're coming from, which is so incredibly important because in closing, you say it's far past time for Democrats to do their job and act. And I want to just stop there just to give you some closing comments here, because again, the biggest impediment to a massive, massive movement requisite the insanity of the corruption that we're in the midst of. What I continue to see, Paul, is that everybody's like, oh my God, corruption is just suddenly Trump, right? The corruption begins and ends with Trump. Everything that we're in the midst of, all of these things that we can't even understand, all of the people who've been ignoring politics forever and ignoring what's been going on, really, quite frankly, since the 80s are like, wait a second, this can't happen because I think they put their trust in people like you that were doing your job, right? Go ahead.
Well, it's look at what we prosecuted corruption. The ground has always been fertile in America for corruption, right? The reality is that what people are seeing now is that this is what you freaking get when you elect people like Trump, right? And what we have to prevent is corruption from becoming institutional, right? So I don't think anyone's happy with corruption. I don't think anyone's happy with the billionaire class. But this equilibrium that you're talking about, this economic equilibrium, what does that do? It makes people content. It makes people happy. And people don't get so angry. What Trump and MAGA have done, as I said earlier, is they've used the economic injustice to foment hatred and people to fight against each other. Trump will say, look, you're getting screwed. Now he'll do nothing to help you, but you're getting screwed. And it's those people doing it. Well, it's not those people doing it. It is the system doing it to them, and the system needs to be fixed. And Democrats need to fix that system. So, look, I think when you have happy, content people, because, and this is history has proven this, when you have a vibrant middle class, people don't get angry, people don't fight with each other, and people will vote with the people who made them happy. And we've got to restore that. We've got to use this injustice that we all feel now. We've got to use this anger that we've all feel now. We've got to get this realization that Trump is a fucking idiot who is only out for himself and is corrupt. And we've got to use that in his 30% approval rating. And we've got to use that to change the dynamic in this country, not just to have the Democratic club in power again.
Right, because it's the revolving door that also works for the guys that don't want anybody to know it, that are like, we're not Trump, but at the same time, we're not going to fix those problems. Do you have to get to a meeting right now, or do you have 5 more minutes?
Oh, I got 5 more minutes.
Okay, because look, everything you laid out is just so inspiring to me, particularly because I know who you are and what you've done and what you bring to the table each and every week. And, last week particularly, and the first time I met you, this is a span of like 8 years, I think we've known each other roughly. And every single time you demonstrate to me, Paul, and I know this isn't about you. This is about everybody getting hip to this. You're just, providing a roadmap because of your experience. And again, I want to reiterate what I mentioned up front. Mr. Pelletier, my friends, has been fighting the biggest criminal organized scenarios in the world, from La Cosa Nostra and literally the mob, right? That we all see in movies our entire life.
Mostly drug cartels, mostly drug cartels.
Drug cartels, fair enough. Yeah, because we're down in Miami, especially. But but also huge healthcare fraud and huge financial fraud. In the thick of it, there's a reason why the best journalists in the country want to ask what's going on when the law doesn't make sense to Paul Pelletier. There's a reason. So please, you got to like, subscribe, and share. Now, the other side of this, Paul, because we got to shake the rails of the Democratic Party pretending that they've got answers when all they're doing is not being Trump. That's not the thing. Trump didn't create all the corruption. He's been a mastermind of nothing. Now, he's been riding the wave the whole time, but at the same time, he's a creation of the system. He's a consequence of everything that Paul's been fighting this whole time, and then some. And by the way, DC reports the guy who's the top chieftain there is none other than David K. Johnston, who's literally probably Donald Trump's most hated journalist, that's been revealing everything Donald Trump's been doing, going back to Manhattan, Atlantic City, and the stories never end. It's unbelievable that we're in this situation. But Paul, what I want to just say, in response to you, this isn't like, hey, look at my plan versus your plan. I just wanted to demonstrate that your plan seems to coexist in equilibrium, and yours is more micro-targeted and focused. But I just want to get your feedback to a couple of things that I say that we call the precepts of what the Clean New Deal is, just for your reaction based on the stuff that you talked about briefly, because I can tell you they are alive, but I want to hear your reaction to it. So the first precept that we create is a recreation of the Glass-Steagall Act, but to basically inform the American people that in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, we worked a workaround with the Federal Reserve that provided tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity to the financial system that you were in the midst of, that were part of an enormous criminal racketeering scheme. I'm curious what your response is to just making clear that our financial system literally was the recipient of government largesse after destroying tens of millions of people.
Sure. So I would say, here's what I want to say. Clearly, the great financial crisis wouldn't have occurred, at least to the depth it did and the way it did, if Clinton hadn't, at the request of neoliberals, gotten rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, number one. Okay. And it was that simple. But I do want to, and we have to find ways to curb financial mismanagement that sort of hurts the American people. I do want to say, though, that the economy that we're moving into today is very different than the economy that existed in 1980, 1990, and at the beginning of 2000. And the recipes for checking it, enhancing those good parts, outlawing those bad parts, may be different than they would have been 15, even 5 years ago. I mean, we now are victims of, I'm going to say Bitcoin, but not just big Bitcoin. That whole economy is criminally adjacent, if nothing else. There is nothing behind it. And so we have to look at those drivers of the economy that are bad and those drivers of the economy that are good. And I'm not an expert in everything, but we're going into AI in a way that's going to change all of our lives eventually, certainly the lives of our children and grandchildren. And so there's all kinds of ways that we can equalize and make create a fairness for the working people that gives them participation. And one of the things I talked about in the article, and I believe it's real, it may be as much as giving your employees a financial stake in the company, which is what they all used to do, right? Giving your employees a financial stake in the company, every employee. And it costs nothing to do that, right? So there are all kinds of things you can do to empower your employees, to empower employee that I may not be the smartest guy to be able to think about it, but someone's got to think about doing that as we go forward in this 21st century into the year 2030, if you can believe.
I completely agree. AI is a whole nother thing, but my shortcut is corruption burrs and fuels the opportunity of fascism, which we're seeing play out literally. The sky is falling with these AI and ICE detention camps and so on and so forth, and the big, beautiful bill. But the second precept of the Clean New Deal is that, well, wait, let me just finish this thought. Dodd-Frank was supposed to prevent everything that took place during the great financial crisis. Now we're on to other things, and there's all sorts of loopholes that didn't really nail it down. And now we're into Trump, this vaudeville act of corruption. But the nature of providing liquidity to a financial system that has train wrecked the economy without accountability is what I'm getting at. The CEOs that are responsible need to pay the price as opposed to we forget about it and they rule the world. Any pushback on that?
Of course not. And the reason why we are today are where we are today is because nobody was held accountable. Look, if Trump had been held accountable for his crimes many, many years ago, we wouldn't even have to worry about him. So the legal system plays a huge part in what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, that's a micro point. The macro point is we've got to level the economic playing field for people. We've got to. And it's going to take those 5 steps, in my view, to be your anchors to do that.
Well, and we in our second precept we identify Glass-Steagall, or not Glass-Steagall, sorry, Citizens United. So you already mentioned that. Now, the third precept that we've germinated is because of the tens of trillions of dollars that went to this system that got away with unbelievable amounts of criminality. What we're saying is, look, people, you got to understand the economic system. Congress has the power of the purse to recreate the middle class. You got to get everybody on the same page that it's like, we're not creating tax breaks and loopholes and this, that, and the other through the big, beautiful bill to maintain this hierarchy of this tyranny of these billionaires that are above the law that basically get all the benefits of government while they control you. So the idea is that if we're going to recreate the middle class, there's so many different things we can do, but just the renewable energy infrastructure is a big part of it, considering all things where we are in the oil paradigm and 7 decades later, right? We're seeing I don't want to go in the whole deal, but that's part of it. That's how you get tens of millions of people to work, in addition to all the things you're talking about with healthcare, affordability, this, that, and the other. So that's just one point I wanted to make you aware of. But I do have a question for you, and I'm really curious how you're going to answer this, and it's not a trick question. But given what we see at SCOTUS, given what we see with what SCOTUS did to create King Donald, given what we've seen in some other areas of power enforcement, particularly law enforcement, should anybody in the system, in the institutions, be above the law?
Oh, of course not. Of course
okay,
not.
simple question, right?
And the problem with SCOTUS is not going to go away unless you do something to dramatically change it. And that's going to be as follows. You're going to have to change the constitution of the Supreme Court in some manner. And that is, you're going to have to put more justices on it, or I would recommend that the next Congress and the next president, should they be all Republican, that they immediately pass a law that says we're putting two new justices on the Supreme Court tomorrow. And then when they do that, right, what's the problem going to be? The problem's going to be, the filibuster. We can't do that because we can't get the justices confirmed. Bullshit. You got to change the filibuster. Make the filibuster what it always was and always used to be, not the 21st century derivation of it. You argue for a limited time, on point, on the issue, and when you're done, you fucking vote. The notion that you can have 10 people just say, I'm blocking it, is crazy. So I would not get rid of the filibuster. I would just make it what it always was. So you fix the filibuster, you put two justices on the court tomorrow, and then let's see what that fucking court does about making that illegal, right?
Right. And during FDR's administration, as I recall, they stacked the court. And then
Well,
they
they tried to, they were going to, and by threatening that, the Supreme Court got in line real fucking quick.
That's right. Okay, that's that. Yeah. The bottom line is that we got to build a plane and fly it at the same time, and we can do that if there's a critical mass. So we're in complete agreement, collusion. You're just a little bit more specific on certain points, which I really appreciate. The final two precepts of the Clean New Deal. Do you think we should have term limits?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. But remember, we've tried that before, and it was ruled unconstitutional, right? It was ruled unconstitutional. So there are ways to change the Constitution, but again, I think you have to work on the pillars of restoration of economic equality, and then all this other stuff begins to fall into place and
Fine.
becomes easier. And
That's
becomes
right, but
easier.
everybody's got to be on the same page, and we got to keep the
Yes.
majority there. And then the final question I have for you is: should members of Congress be able to do insider trading?
Of course not, and nor should the president.
Okay, well, we're on the same page. I mean, but you're obviously what I love about it. I mean, we were always, I knew we would be, but I just wanted to demonstrate that. Look, it's a paradigmatic approach, people, that you got to understand your government. You got to understand where we are, but more importantly, if we don't revitalize the middle class and we don't create the structure of accountability, then as far as I can tell, the United States isn't the United States. And here we have Paul Pelletier, a guy who's been there, done that, and he's doing it again. So we have to inspire people that it's not just about we're not Trump. That's not going to cut it. That's like people, we have complex systems. We have incredibly proficient and smart people in this country by the millions, by the millions. What we've under the guise of is just liars at the moment that have somehow galvanized really not so smart people to be able to just basically like, okay, those of us who aren't that need to get behind this. And we're not going to be able to do it unless people understand that it works. And so that means you have to share, you have to like, you have to subscribe. If anybody has any questions, anybody wants to, further this, if you're a journalist, please reach out to me. I'll introduce you to Paul. And then, if anybody has questions and we want to create more town halls downstream, we should. We record every Friday, that sort of thing. But there is no time left. This is imperative that it has to happen now, and it has to happen before the midterms, because would you agree, Paul, that if we don't somehow see a giant response from the American people that is in its political process, that what's on the other side of that, I don't even want to fathom.
I think that just to close it out, I think that the reason why I wrote this in 5,000 words or less is because I wanted it to be digestible by everyone. And I want, whether you agree with these 5 pillars or you disagree with these 5 pillars, if you talk to any congressman, any senator, anybody running for office, and you ask them what we need to do to fix it, they'll give you 15, 20, 30 different things. And everybody, we have 455 congressmen, right? We have 100 senators, and they all have, and half of those are Democrat, right? Well, we hopefully more after the election. But we have to get everybody on the same page. And the way to do it is to structure a plan and to give everyone an opportunity to weigh in on that plan. So I think going forward, I think there's time between now and the election to get people comfortable with this, right? Because remember, these 5 pillars are not going to be able to be passed with a Republican president. So we have to have a Democrat president in order to pass the structural change that's set forth herein. But I will tell you, it's urgent that we have structural change. I just don't feel like it's going to be possible within the next 2 to 3 years, right? But people need to start working on it now, and people need to focus. So what I would urge is everyone, whether you agree with my 5 pillars or not, copy this, send it to your congressman, get people start thinking about the same shit. And that is providing economic justice to everybody in America, not just the wealthy people.
Well, on that note, I thank you for your time as always, Paul. Thank you for your effort. And I will put the article down below. And I encourage everybody to do exactly what we've been saying the last several minutes here. Thank you so much. And until next time, we'll see you guys on Friday. Take care.
Thank you, Patrick.
Take
Appreciate
care,
it.
Paul.
All right, we'll talk to you Friday.